Hello everyone, today we will see the 3 exposure parameters and a little secret. So we have 3 exposure parameters in photography. We have sensitivity, the ISO, formerly known as ASA. There were other scales like DIN, DIN, and Ghost. But now the whole planet uses ISO, which is great. No conversion needed. The second parameter is the speed, right? And the third one is the aperture. All right, so let's go over them just once more, right? So sensitivity is a scale of, it says, right, sensitivity. So the more your ISO number is high, the more sensitive your sensor is to light. And let's say you are at ISO 200, it's twice as sensitive as at ISO 100. So there is always this unit in photography which is called a stop. A stop, a difference of one stop is either double or half. So for example, at ISO 400, I am at one stop away from ISO 200, right? It's twice sensitive at ISO 400 compared to ISO 200. At ISO 400, it's 4 times as sensitive as ISO 100, and so on. So the scale in the sensitivity, so we could have ISO 6, 12, 25, 50, 100, 200, 400, and so on. It goes into the millions now. And back in the days, I did some daguerreotypes. It was ISO 0.025, which is really slow. Actually, I didn't do, I just helped doing some. Oh my God, that's a lot of work. I used special film at ISO 1.2, but our cameras usually are about from ISO 100 and more these days. So the standard values are 100, 200, 400, and so on. But any value can be valid. You could have ISO 64, ISO 320, ISO 111. Any value is valid. But we chose to be standard 100, 200, 400, and they're all separated by one stop. Each standard values are separated by one stop. You could separate your values with quarter stops or third of stops or half stops. It doesn't matter. All values are valid. But the standards are 100 and then a stop more and more and more. All right? So the general rule with ISO is like a center column of a tripod. We just raise it when we need it, right? So the more we raise it, the more trouble we will have. With a tripod, it's vibration, but with ISO, it's going to be grain or noise, right? In the digital age, it's noise. Back in the film days, it used to be grain. And here's the difference between grain and noise. So this is an example of a picture took at ISO 100 with a digital camera at f8. It's really sharp, really clean image. And this is an image took with an old camera. It was a Nikon D200 at 3200 ISO, which is the equivalent maybe now to, I don't know, ISO 10 million with a D5. So it's really noisy. And you see the noise in the image, it's quite square. It's kind of pixelated. This image here is different. It's ISO 3200 but film. This is a Delta 3200 Delta Pro from Ilford, and you see it's more grainy, it's more random, it's not exactly as pixelated. It's film grain. That's the difference. Nowadays, the sensors are so big that the pixelation effect, I don't know if it's the proper term, but it's kind of not visible much anymore because of the sheer size of the sensors. And also a nice recipe if you want to do really nice portraits of people that are somewhat drunk. Put your camera, okay, use a big aperture like f1.4, f1.8, f2, around there. Okay, make portraits and already switch that to black and white. And put your ISO to the max. Don't be shy, really. Go for it. It's gonna be noisy, but in black and white, it's always beautiful. And people with, a little beer in their nose are gonna say, oh wow, you're really good, you're an artist, it's so great. And then you just have to hand some business cards to them. It works. If you try with me to list the standard speeds, let's say we go from 1 second and we go faster and faster, and we separate our values with one stop. So from 1 second we arrive to half a second, and then a quarter of a second, and then 1/8, and then not 1/16. No, it's 1/15. So see, photography is not an exact science, and like in computers, it's really exact, So it would have been 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32, 1/64, 1/28, and at some point it's 4096, 8001. I mean, doesn't really matter to be that precise. 1/4000, that's precise enough. So the standard values are 1, 1/2, quarter, 8, 1/15, 1/30, 1/60, 1/25, and then from 1/25 we just divide by 2 every time. So 1/250, 1/500, 1000, and so on. So same thing if we go slower than 1 second. So still the standard values are separated by one stop, so it's always half or double the amount. Amount can be in any value, it can be in time, in aperture, in sensitivity. So one stop is always double or half. So from 1 second we go double, we go 2 seconds. After that, another stop, we're at 4 seconds, and then 8 seconds, and then you guessed it, not 16 seconds, 15 seconds, right? It's not exact. And then, so exactly in photography, 15 seconds is exactly double of 8 seconds, right? So if you have an issue here, okay, photography is not exact, and it's okay like that, okay? So 15 seconds, then 30 seconds, then 1 minute, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, and so on, all right? So these are the standard values. Any value are valid, but these are the standard values that are separated by one stop. So what happens if we need to take pictures even slower than 30 seconds? 30 seconds is usually the limit that manufacturers put on their cameras. After that, there is the bulb mode. So what is it? First of all, where does it come from? Well, back in the days, when people were using these kind of cameras, when they went indoors, they needed some more light, they used bulbs, right? Flash bulbs. So obviously today we have flash, electronic flash, but before we had flash bulbs. We also had smaller versions of them, but what is special about flash bulbs is the synchronization. See, with these flashes, when the camera triggers the electronic flash, it's really fast. It's not instant. There's a small delay, but it's really, really fast. We don't see it, of course. But these, when the camera triggers it, then it ignites, then it fills a form you know, and then it eats up and then it flashes. Okay, of course it's really, really fast. We don't even see the difference. But for the camera, this is really, really slow. So the camera needs to trigger these flash bulbs before it actually would need to trigger an electronic flash. So the synchronization between these two are different. So this is X synchronization, electronic. This is M synchronization for, I don't remember, I'll put it down. So this is where it comes from, the bulbs, the flash bulbs. So what does it mean? So if I show you, let's say this camera here at 1/4 of a second, right? So this is 1/4 of a second. If I put it at bulb, seems the same, huh? Not exactly. If I press, so it's going to take the picture as long as I have my finger on this shutter. If I remove my finger, then it's done. So bulb mode is the camera will keep the lens open, sorry, the shutter open as long as I have my finger there. Okay, so why exactly? So when back in the days people were using these cameras, so what they did is they use bulb mode. So they triggered the lens open or the shutter, then they triggered the flash, and then they stopped doing the exposure, right? So they were guaranteed that the flash bulb happened during the exposure time and not after because of a bad synchronization. So this is where it's from. Now there is a slight variance. So this is an example of a large format lens. So there is bulb and there is also T, which stands for time. So as we saw, so let's make a 1 second exposure here. So I don't know if you can see, maybe this way is going to be more clear. So I'm going to trigger this for 1 second. All right, so it worked for 1 second. Now I'm going to put it to bulb. All right, so now it's at bulb. I'm going to, all right, and now I keep my finger there. So the shutter is open as long as I have my finger there. I just moved a little bit. All right, so bulb, no more bulb, right? Time is just a slight variation from this. It's, you hit it once. Oh, sorry, it was still on bulb. Now it's on time. So 1, it stays open until you press it a second time. That's it. That's the only difference between time and bulb. All right. Now this is interesting because it's where the creativity starts. What can we do with the speed, right? So the ISO, we saw that we have to keep it as low as possible. We just raise it when we need it. But speed, we can actually choose, it depends, right? So here are a few examples. So choosing speed, basically we can, fix a precise instant, right? Even here, the instant is not exactly fixed as we can see the ball still in movement, just a little bit. We can do the opposite. We can capture some movement in its own, right? I really like to do pedestrians like this walking, generally around 1/4 of a second, around there, between 1/8 and 1/2 of a second. You see both legs and arms blurry like that. I really love that. And on top of that, it's great because people cannot, you cannot recognize people on this. So technically, if you need to not see people, then it's a good way, no less trouble. So there's another thing we can do by choosing a specific speed is the panning effect. So the panning effect is a way to detach your subject from the background, but the subject has to be moving, right? So typically you have a racing car, right? It moves fast. and you take it at, I don't know, 1/8,000 of a second, well, the image is going to be not blurry. You're going to see the leaves in the background. You're going to see all the marks on the tire. And you could have taken that picture while the car was totally static, right, in a parking lot. But by reducing the speed of the shutter and by following the car or your moving subjects, whatever it is, then you're going to have linear blur in the background. While keeping the camera on your subject gonna stay sharp, but you're gonna have linear blur, and it's gonna make a really better image, right? It's gonna be dynamics. The person that is seeing the image, wow, he understands that this car is moving so fast, right? And a little tip for that: I'm not in favor of selling too much equipment to people, especially when they don't need it. But for this technique, the stabilized zoom lens, telephotos, obviously, they help quite a lot. So instead of having about, I don't know, 30% of good shots, you're going to have like 70% of good shots, which is good. And guess which mode we use on the camera when we want to select a specific speed? Yeah, it's shutter priority. S, or also known as TV, time vector, or shutter speed priority. It's all the same. So you choose your speed and the camera choose the rest, for the proper exposure. All right, now we move to aperture. So aperture is the third exposure parameters, and it's another one that is really helpful to create really good images. So what is the unit for aperture? Well, there is no unit. It's a ratio between two distances. So it's a ratio between the focal length and the diameter of the iris in the lens. So why it was chosen, that system, a ratio between those two distances? Because it is the easiest way of working, and if you need to change from different focal length, a f4 lens is a f4 lens. If you have a fisheye, a wide, a standard, a tele or super tele, an f4 lens, you will always have the same light debit within the lens at f4. Of course, if you have the same light in front of the lens, right? But it's going to be the same debit of light that's going to get in the camera. Why? Because it's the diameter of the iris compared to the focal length. So the bigger the lens you have, it means that the bigger the opening it has to be to compensate for the small amount of light that is getting into the light. Because if you have a wide angle, a lot of light is getting into the lens. But if you have a really narrow teleobjective, then it's only the light from a really specific place that gets into the lens. So the iris has to be bigger to compensate for that different angle. All right. So an f4 lens teleobjective, maybe the iris will be big like that. Okay. But for a wide angle, it's going to be much smaller. Actually, it's going to be exactly the exact equivalent of the two focal length. So for example, if you have a 1000 millimeter lens and a 100 millimeter iris, it's f10. You see, ratio of 10. And if you have a fisheye of 10 millimeter, that same ratio, you will only have 1 millimeter diameter, same ratio, same amount of lens getting into, so same amount of light getting into the lens. All right. So this is why we use those weird f-stop numbers. All right. I can assure you it's the easiest way we can work with. And the standard values for aperture, if we start at f1. So f1, it's really a big aperture. Now if we close one stop, so we will have only half of the light, we will not be at half of the diameter. No. It's like pizza sizes. See, if you have a size, let's say you have a 10-inch pizza. Let me ask you this question. I hope you ate something before. So if we have a 20-inch pizza, how much ingredients within a 10-inch pizza we can fit into a 20-inch pizza? Think about it. It's not double, it's 4 times. So the diameter is double, but the area is 4 times. All right? So, see where I'm going? So at f1, we have a really big aperture. Now if we want half of the light debit getting into the camera, of course, it's not going to be 2 times smaller. The diameter is going to be 1.4 times smaller. If we go 2 times smaller, then we will have 2 stops difference. We will have the quarter of the light getting into the camera. All right, so we have the standard values are f1. At 1 stop difference, we have f1.4. Then we have f2, f2.8, f4, f5.6, f8, 11, 16, 22, 32, 45, and so on. Okay, and for all the other parameters is the same. So all values are valid. Example, f0.95, f1.2, f1.7, f1.8, f2.2, f3.5, f4.5. All values are valid, but these are the specific values we chose as photographers to be the standard ones. From f1, we go to 1.4, 2, 2.8, and so on. All right. And why we chose the standard value is because we can compensate one parameter with the other one, right? So if we have ISO 100, an exposure of 1 second at f1, if we put a value of f1.4 instead of f1, we have to compensate somewhere else to have the same exposure, right? We can have either ISO 200 instead, or we can expose for 2 seconds instead. See, so the same amount of light can be captured in many different ways, and this is where creativity kicks in, right? So in aperture priority mode, so this is the mode we use when we want to specifically use one aperture and we let the camera choose the rest. Yeah, creativity starts there. What can we do? So first, by choosing a specific aperture, we can put the emphasis on a specific subject. See, so this is a guy standing in front of a bar. We understand a bit the place he's in. It's it's been taken with a wide angle, probably f4. The subject is I don't know, maybe 5-6 feet away. So it's a bit blurry in the background, but there's quite some detail. Now, if we open a bit more, see, the subject here is the first cop, not the second one, not the background. The subject is the first cop. What is he about to do now? Not sure, huh? Here, the subject is the gun. Don't worry, it's a plastic gun, right? So, oh, by the way, that picture I made in 3D as well, and it's quite freaky because a 3D picture and the gun is standing out of the window, the 3D window, and if you move, it's always tracking you. It's a bit freaky. Quite an experience. Here, the subject is Susan. It's only her that is sharp, right? The rest is blurry, and she's the only one who sees life in color. That's pretty nice. All right, so first thing, we can put the emphasis on the subject. Second thing, we can, on the contrary, we can have a lot of detail in the foreground and the background. So to do that, I'll explain later how to do it with hyperfocals. So we use hyperfocals to have the maximum depth of field we can. And I'll have another video about depth of field as well. All right. And the third thing we can do with choosing a specific aperture is to optimize the sharpness of our images. Now, this thing is only and only for the person that prints really big, right? You don't have to print yourself, but you know, I don't print myself, but I like to print 40 by 60 inches. So if you print big, this can be important, right? So let me explain something. So let's say my face is the sensor, and this is the inside of a camera, and we have a lens in the front here. Okay, so let's say we have a huge lens. This is the diameter of the lens. All right. So when I'm fully open, just to create one dot in the image, there's a ray of light that is coming from a lot of places at the same time. See, so this is the back of the lens. So there's a ray of light coming from here, a ray of light coming from here, and from here, and from here. So there's an infinity of light rays concentrating in the same cercle de confusion circle, right? In the same area to form one pixel. Now, even if you have a budget of $1 billion to create the perfect lens, it's not gonna be perfect. And all those rays are not exactly gonna concentrate at the same place. So, the more wide open you are, the more chances you have all your light rays will not be exactly at the same place. So, the bigger your aperture is, the blurrier your images, right? So now if we close down to the other end, so the bigger your aperture is, the blurrier your images are. Now if we close down, it's going to be blurry as well, but for a different reason, right? So if we close down, right? Let me rephrase. So if we are fully open, we have a full disk of light that is getting into the camera, which is huge. And we have one small circle around that is affected by the proximity of the blades, of the aperture blades. And when light comes close to that, it gets diffracted, right? So because of diffraction, light will not always be at this exact same place, okay? But when we are wide open, it doesn't really matter because that disk is so immense. But when we stop down, when we close down our lens, what happens is that disk of light is much smaller compared to the disk, to the disk which is affected by diffraction. So when we are really, when we use a small aperture, the diffraction affects a lot more our images. So, to make it short, the bigger the aperture is, the blurrier the image are, and the smaller the aperture is, the blurrier the images are. So, what the hell, right? Well, it's a sweet spot in the middle. Generally, f8 and be there. You know, some photographers said that at some point, f8 and be there. I don't remember who. I'll put it down below. So, if you want to know more about resolution of your lens, you can consult MTF charts. You can look your specific lens. Oh yeah, the best resolution, you have it at f5.6 or f11 or f8 or whatever it is. So it's only valid if you print big, okay? If you don't print big, don't bother with that, okay? Use f1, f64, it doesn't matter. But if you do start to print big, bigger and bigger, then you're gonna see the difference between the same picture took at f4, 5, 6, and 8. It's not gonna be the same sharpness. You're gonna see it probably at f8, it's gonna be much sharper. And if you do landscapes and print big, then this is important, all right? So we saw the 3 exposure parameters, right? Sensitivity in ISO, speed in seconds, and aperture in crocodiles or whatever it is, because it's a ratio of 2 distances, so there's no unit. It can be the unit of your choice. All right, so we can compensate all of these. We can start to do some creative stuff by using aperture priority or shutter priority to choose a specific speed or choose a specific aperture. The next video we will see in depth what is depth of field and how to control it, right? Because we can do some creative stuff with it. But also in a further video we'll talk about hyperfocals, and hyperfocals gives the photographers the possibility to never focus again. Okay, it unlocks so many possibilities in photography when you don't need to focus. All right, so I'm gonna give a lot of tips for you on how to use hyperfocals. All right, so thanks very much for watching. Please, if you have your own ideas, add to comments, share, like, please subscribe, and have fun, of course. Practice, and may the photo be with you.